Hey watch friends, today we're going to take a look at the latest upcoming model from Alcadus. This is their prototype of the Dromo. For administrative matters, I do want to mention up front, this is a prototype that was loaned into this channel. In fact, it's an early prototype, so there'll be a number of production changes that we're going to talk about throughout the review. This one, as I mentioned, is going to be coming to Kickstarter here. This is not yet released. It's tentatively slated for March 11th of 2022, and it will actually be dropping alongside another model that we've looked at, the V1 version of the Opus. The Opus V2 is going to be released along with this Dromo. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a deep dive look into this. Mainly, I want to highlight just kind of a first look, as well as to touch upon some of the items that are expected to change for production. As far as the packaging, that has not yet been finalized. If you want to check out the previous packaging, it is going to be shrunken down from some of the other models in the past to be a little more economical. That being said, those details are not yet available. The warranty still will be the standard for Alcadus, which is a 2+1. What that means is it comes standard with 2 years. Once you register, you get a third year on that. So it has a generous warranty. As far as the specs on this Dromo model, the case is coming in at 39 millimeters, and that is measured roughly from the 3 o'clock to the 9 o'clock position. The bezel does step down slightly, and I'm getting on my calipers at 38.8 millimeters, so you can see just a very tiny little lip. The lugs are a strap change friendly 20 millimeters. The lug to lug is only 45.1, and as we'll see, this does have FEMO end links as well, so that is a true 45.1. Nice short lug to lug. The thickness. This is one of the areas that's going to be changing. Right now, it's fairly stout on my calipers at 13.9 millimeters, but as you can see, that's including this huge dome box edge crystal here, which actually it's a somewhat flat, but box edge crystal. They are expecting to slim that down significantly. Without the crystal already, I'm getting 10.3 millimeters. So that is a good difference there. And the crystal does typically slide under a sleeve a little easier. On the production version, they're going to be changing this crystal. So right now it is a box edge sapphire crystal. It does have an inner AR. They're going to go with one that has a little less distortion, which I think, as we'll talk about throughout, will increase the overall dial presence as well as the legibility. It's going to be more similar to one we've looked at in the past. The model is called the Velos. If you want to check that out, there is a video down in the channel description there. As far as the movement, this comes with the nice versatile Miyota 9039. Great high beat movement, hacking, hand winding, all those kind of good things. Everything you could want. On the dial, you're going to notice this says 300 meters or 30 atmospheres water resistance. However, that's another item that's going to change. On the production version, it will actually be reduced down to 200 meters or 20 atmospheres. I think it's still plenty of water resistance, but the nice thing about that I believe is part of how they're going to slim this down. So they're going to reduce the crystal a little bit, have a little less distortion, and I believe slim everything down just a little bit to bring this in under 13 total, including the crystal, which really isn't too bad at all. In its current configuration, size to my 6.5-inch wrist, this weighs in at 119.4 grams. So really not too bad. Definitely on the lighter side. This is what I would call above a featherweight, but below middleweight as far as my typical nomenclature there for the overall weight of this one. All right, so now taking a deeper dive look into some of the color options they're planning to have available. There's obviously going to be the black that we're looking at today. There's also going to be a blue, a green, a salmon, a yellow, and a white variant that are available. So you have plenty of choices. Across the lineup though, what you'll notice is most of them are going to have a sand texture, like the black version that we're looking at today. The overall effect and visual look to this is to me kind of reminiscent of a ship port, which I think is in keeping, as we'll see, with the case back of this model, as well as the namesake. The way the crystal pops up, the protrusion, the way that it's inlaid in, it really to me gives that ship port type effect. The dial has printing at both the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock position. At 12 o'clock, you have the brand name of Alcadus, and at 6 o'clock, you have the model name of Dromo, as well as the water resistance. Again, that will be updated. And you'll notice the water resistance color does match the accent color on this particular model of yellow, as you can see out on the second tip, or the second hand tip as well. Out on the perimeter, it's kind of hard to make out, but you can see that yellow accent does carry there onto a very steep rehot. As you can see with the current crystal, that is very highly distorted out at that edge, so you do have to turn that to an angle to pick up that rehot. However, on the production version, that I do suspect, similar to the Velos, will be a little more legible and easier to pick up there. As far as the hardware, this one has a triple set, so on the second hand, or the minute hand rather, I would call that a pencil style. On the hour hand, I would call that a sword style. And then on the second hand, something we've seen on other Alcadus models in the past, you can see where it looks like an arrow tip that actually is carrying through the company's logo, which is a neat touch and something that I like that they carry through. It keeps with their design language. Pretty cool there. The finishing on the hardware is brushing, as you can see there on the handset. Moving out to the markers though, the markers are applied, and those do to my eye appear to have nice polishing applied as well, which I think pops nicely against that black sand texture on this particular variant. As far as the shapes of the markers, you can see this does predominantly have round markers. However, at the 3, 6, and 9, you're going to have trapezoids, and then at the 12 o'clock position, again, they carry over that company logo, which I think is a cool touch. As far as the loom on this I found to be pretty adequate. To my eye, this appears to be a C3 loom. It's a decent application all the way around. This isn't one that I think is going to be a complete torch or that's going to be the most impressive you've seen, but it's plenty usable in my experience and I think does the job well. As you can see, it is applied to the bezel as well as the markers and all 3 of the hands, though the second hand does have the smallest application. As far as the bezel on this is going to be a dive style configuration, so it is unidirectional 120 clicks. Let's go ahead and give that a listen. As you can hear, nice tactile click to that. It is not going to be the strongest that I've experienced, nor is it the softest. It's kind of right in the middle there. One thing that I will say though, and we'll talk about this further as we go throughout, is the action on this. The action itself is fine. The bezel actual grip here, we'll talk about that more. This has very light, very soft knurling. To me, it is almost a decorative knurling. Between that and the polishing that you can see around the perimeter here, this is a very slippery bezel. It's really tough to get a hold of, and then with having the sapphire insert, I find that I end up smushing my fingers in, and then I end up with smears and fingerprints all over that. So let's go and actually clean some of those off there for our visual effect here. But overall, it's what you'd expect for a dive. Everything appears to line up pretty well for the most part. Maybe a tick off to the left there. But that being said, everything appears to be pretty solid. Once the distortion is cleared up, you'll be able to measure that a little more. Right now, you can't see that well as far as that goes anyways. As we already talked about, with the polished perimeter here, it does give a nice contrast to the case. Which, speaking of the case, as you can see, this is going to be predominantly brushed finish, and it is vertical brushing all along the side here. However, it does have, up at the top, you can see nice polish accents that carry through, and I think that adds a good contrast with the bezel, though personally, as we already talked about, for the actual grip, I'd prefer more aggressive knurling, and additionally, I'd probably prefer these carried through the brush, though visually, I do think it looks nice. The actual flow of the case, as you can see, it does have a nice smooth flow to it, a very thin mid-case overall, and that's in keeping with that 10.3 millimeters without the crystal there. So I think that gives a nice contour to that. As you can see, the lugs are nicely downturned, and they do extend just beyond the case back, though I've not found that it digs into the wrist, though I do have a smaller wrist at around 6.5 inches, as we'll see here momentarily. On the production version, one of the other changes you can see right now, it does not have drilled lug holes. However, on the production version, it will have drilled lug holes for easier strap changes. So that's something that's a welcome change there. And then over on the crown side, you can see the case just carries through with the symmetry and no integrated crown guard. On the topic of the crown, this comes in at 6.3 millimeters on this outer edge. As you can see, it's kind of a conical shape in keeping with what I would call like a pilot style for that overall shape. The construction is going to be screw down, as you can see there. And let's go ahead and unscrew that. You can see, similar to a recent RZE Fortitude that we looked at, it does have a little red hint and accent there. Unlike the RZE though, this is not a functional, whereas that one was designed to be a visual check as to whether the crown was unscrewed or not. This, as you can see, when we screw that in, you can still make out just that little bit of red, so it doesn't serve that functional purpose for that. I honestly would probably prefer that be changed around just to take a little bit of that visual away, especially right now I think it highlights the gap between the crown and the case. So that's something I think they could lose, but it's a really minor thing overall. All right, the crown also is, as we saw, going to be signed here, and it is additionally loomed. So I'll go ahead and pop up a picture of that. Nice, well-applied loom there. As for the caseback construction on this is going to be a screw-in construction. It is predominantly going to be polished on the exterior and blasting in the interior with polished accents. You can see the current configuration has a ship, which again ties back to the Dromo namesake. However, do note, I don't yet know what the production version is going to look like. This is actually going to be completely revamped, so you want to stay tuned and check out the Kickstarter campaign to see the final version as to what that looks like. So I don't want to spend a lot of time there. As for the bracelet, of course, as you would expect, is coming in at 20 millimeters at the case. It does taper down 4 millimeters to 16 millimeters at the clasp. The end links are female, so nice drape there, and it does keep for the short lug to lug. The links themselves are pretty flat in construction. Let's go ahead and look at that from a profile perspective. You can see it's fairly boxy, fairly sharp, and I will say the edges aren't really broken on that, so you do feel a little bit of that sharpness on the outside. However, they are a little more broken on the inside. I haven't really noticed that as far as impacting the comfort, though certainly I wouldn't have minded if those were broken a little more. The finishing is brushed all the way through, and the links are held in with large screws. So for people who have had issues with screw links in the past, this definitely does have a larger head than most, and I think it's a little easier to get a hold of. One of the biggest things that's going to be changing with the bracelet is going to be this clasp. The clasp, as you can see, does carry forward with that brushed finish. It is signed up at the top of the clasp. Right now, it is just a standard pop-style construction, and as you see there, this is stamped as well. On the production version, they are trying to make this where it's going to be a milled clasp as well. You know, people are always mixed on that. Stamped, certainly, it is considered to be typically lesser than milled. I will say, though, this does give a very, very slim overall presence for that. So that aspect I really like a lot about this clasp. That being said, it is a little bit jingly and things like that you get with stamped. So it, I will say, does make it feel a little bit cheaper, but it also feels nice on the wrist with having such a thin clasp. On the side, you can see it does have 7 micro adjust holes on this current configuration, though again, this one's going to be changing around, so we'll have to keep an eye out to see what they come up with for the final production version. Alright, so now that we have a better feel for the watch, I wanted to go ahead and bring in just a couple other ones to give a look. Here it is. This is a Zelos Horizons GMT. This is a 40mm watch compared to the stated nominal 39mm here, and you can see both of these are going to have pronounced box edge. You can see those, even though it's considered to be very pronounced in this Horizon, it's really pronounced on this Dromo. So I do think it's a good idea that they're going to tame that down a little bit. I like a box edge and a high dome as much as the next guy, but that being said, this one, it does have some functional impact to it, though I think it's a cool look. And then another one just to bring in a different 40mm diver here. This is the Reverie Diver, and just gives you an idea of size. As you can see from those, you know, this really does have overall a smaller presence, and that's primarily, I think, lending, not only is it set back, wide bezel, all those kind of things, but the crystal. That crystal, with having such a pronounced box edge, I really think it takes away some of the real estate, but we'll talk about that further. So let's go ahead and wrap things up with my personal view of some of the positives, where I see potential for this one, some of the critiques that I have, and things I'd like to see changed, as well as the overall summary. First, for value. We didn't talk about pricing. This is going to be launching at around $300 for the early bird pricing. When you talk about sapphire crystal, sapphire bezel insert, Miyota 9039, overall, I think you're getting a good bit for your money. So if the style appeals to you, I think the value is there. The porthole aesthetic. Speaking of the style of it, I think the porthole aesthetic is really cool. You know, I've been kind of on the fence as to how I feel about the smaller dial presence, because even on my 6.5-inch wrist, I do think the dial presence is a little bit small. The case itself, not so much. The dial presence is a little small, so it takes some getting used to, but I do think it's a cool look. The comfort, I found to be pretty reasonable. The case itself, I think, fits very comfortably. The bracelet's not the most comfortable that I've ever had on wrist, but it's really not too bad. Part of that, I think, is lending. It could be broken a little more, and the links are a little on the long side because of the flatter construction, but really not too bad at all, so I think that's pretty respectable. And then finally, the movement. If you know the channel, you know I'm a big fan of the Miyota 9039 or 9000 series, and this one's no exception, especially at $300. Alright, some of the critiques or items that I would like to see cleaned up on the production version. We already talked about the dial presence as well as the legibility. I really welcome that crystal change. I do think that will help not only to expand out the presence, which I think is going to turn some people off, but additionally from the legibility. As you can see, in normal viewing, that rehot in those the minute markers out there, they really, unless you tilt it significantly, they're pretty much not even there. It's basically just a white accent around the perimeter. So that's something I do think will be a good improvement, and I look forward to seeing that. The clasp, as we already talked about, you know, the clasp, I do think with the rattly feel, just the general preference towards milled, those kind of things, I do think there's some improvement that can be made on this overall, and I'm glad to see that they're giving that attention. And then finally, the main other point is going to be the bezel. The bezel, as we already talked about, I would prefer that this go over to a brushing, and additionally, I'd like this knurling to be much more aggressive than it is. I really think that will help. The action itself is not too bad. Right now, it's just so darn grab a hold of, that I do think is a takeaway and detractor from this bezel. But overall, not too bad. So where does that leave us? You know, with so many changes, this one was a little bit hard to prepare the review for, because this really truly is an early prototype model. So I don't want to judge too much from what actually I have on hand, and more want to judge from the potential I see. This one I do think has some nice potential to it. I would like to see some of those production improvements that we've talked about throughout the video that are implemented, but provided that they deliver on that, especially at the $300 price point, I think this is definitely worth a look. So I do encourage you, when this drops on March 1st of 2022 on Kickstarter, to take a look, keep an eye on the campaign, see what kind of incentives they have for that in the stretch goals, and what kind of production changes they're making. But I definitely think it's worth a look. For me personally though, in case you haven't already seen it, I do have that Opus video, the V2 version of the Opus. That would personally be the one that would catch my attention more. I really liked the Opus. I thought it was a nicely done piece. And I definitely think, if for no other reason, you want to check out the production improvements to the Dromo, but also I do encourage you to check out that Opus. So I hope this video has helped to give you a better feel for this watch. If you did like this, please do hit that like button. Additionally, if you haven't done so already, please do smash that subscribe button. Greatly appreciated, helps the channel. Thanks for watching.